Oh,
Invited, Dave.
what's that?
Invited.
It's too late for me.
Until I
Invited
can't.
anybody, but there's Charlton Kishka.
It's too late for Schultz and Gishka too.
Yeah. Dalton Gish.
Okay, once again, today's broadcast is being sponsored by the Zolti family, the Elishmas of Moshe and Chaim, who took care of us so well when he was here, and I'm sure he's continuing to take care of us where he has even more pull. And we should be zeicha to be reunited. B'ez Hashem, Mashiach comes the Torah mamish.
Oh, man.
So we learned yesterday Daf Mem Gimel, and the Mishnah taught us about if someone answers on no because he's upset about the fact that someone didn't want to lend him his Torah, and then we had how to deal with if there's an Isra no, but you need to funnel money to that person who's not allowed to have enough from you, how you could do it in an indirect fashion. What the Gemara focused on was Rabbi Yosy, who didn't allow you to be mafker. So the Tanakama held you could just put food down on a rock and be mafker it, thereby allowing the person who's muda bano to eat that food. But Rabbi Yosy said that's not allowed. And the Gemara was probing why Rabbi Yosy held it wasn't allowed. So the Gemara had a Havamina, which the Gemara abandoned, was the Svara of Rabbi Yochanan, that maybe Rabbi Yosy holds that when you're mafker something, it allows it to be removed from your rishus, but it didn't remove it from your rishus until whoever is zoich in the hefker actually takes it away. If that's how hefker works, then when this other person is having a no from something that I was mafker, technically he was having a no of something that he took directly from me. So therefore it wouldn't work. The Gemara abandoned that. The Gemara proved that svara wrong, and the Gemara ended up saying something much more balabatish, and it was the gzeira of matnas beis chayrin. If we allow someone to use hefker to channel money to somebody who is usher to have an offer from him, he might do a fraudulent type of transaction, like the person in beis chayrin who wanted his father to come to the wedding. So he said, I'm only being mafker this so that my father can come to the wedding because he's not allowed to have an offer me. And there it doesn't work, and his father would have been over and Isra no. So because of that, Zok Rabbi Yosy, stay away from hefker completely. Okay.
Where do we draw the line with this type of we make a gezerah because maybe he'll do a trick. We do tricks all the time. We have these legal fictions that we create with heteriskis.
For selling chometz, that trick works. If you do a trick and it actually works, but here, if a guy says I'm being mafked only so that my father could do it, but don't you dare take anything home, so he only thinks what he's doing is working, but it's not even working technically.
No, I have a hard time with this. The argument isn't that solid, Yosy.
It's definitely not simply shot.
Yeah,
It definitely doesn't qualify as simply shot.
Yeah.
I'll agree with that. Okay, so today we're going to have a very interesting Gemara because the whole Gemara is going to be based. There's a famous story with the Rosh Hashiva who on Purim gave a complicated lomdish shir on a shver Rambam. So they asked him like, I don't understand. Like it's Purim. Like, wouldn't you give something a little lighter? Why should I love the shir and the shver Rambam? So you didn't get the joke. There was no such Rambam. I made up the Rambam. So today we're going to learn the whole Gemara that's going to be working on this halacha that we said from Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yosy that we just abandoned, that in fact hefker doesn't leave my rishus right away. Hefker hangs around. Hefker just allows somebody to take it from me, but he's actually taking it from me. So even though we've abandoned that svara, and if it makes you feel better, all the way at the Ram, we're going to learn now a complicated Gemara, and all the way at the end, everybody's saying, oh, by the way, anyway, this is not relevant. So today's Gemara is going to be a very interesting exercise in Lomdus, but it's not going to be relevant to Halacha. That's a good shaila. Someone is mafker something and he dies, and he dies. Who does do his kids ration? So I mean, wouldn't it prove that we don't hold Rabbi Yosy? We already proved we don't hold that. We already proved that Hefker doesn't work that way. Nevertheless, the Gemara is looking at other angles that maybe will prove or disprove it. So even though we know the Maskana already, we're going to still have a sugya that discusses this shayla. Okay, so let's start from the bottom of Daf Mem Gimel Abayz. We're already 3 lines behind. I hope we'll be able to manage this blot today, because we're starting, from before. So we'll see how it goes. Zok the Heilige Gemara. Tanya, we learned in the Brisa. Now, when we learn the Brisa, don't worry, it's not going to make any sense to you, but the Ran will help us sort it out and extract from the Brisa those bits of information that we need. Tanya, Hamafker Esodeyu. Somebody was mafker his field. Kol shloisha yomim yochel achsaboy. The hefker does not become irrevocable until 3 days pass. Mikan ve'elech ein yochel achsaboy. After 3 days, the hefker becomes irrevocable. Thank you. The Brisa does not say anything. The Brisa does not say anything about. It depends on if somebody was koined or not. So it's mashma that after 3 days, it's irrevocable and it's completely out of my rishus, which would right off the bat indicate not like what Rabbi Yochanan was saying in Rabbi Yosy. Because what Rabbi Yochanan said in Rabbi Yosy is, hefker is mine until someone comes along and takes it. Hefker is just permission to take it. But here it says that after 3 days, it leaves my rishus completely. Where the 3-day delay comes from, that's going to be discussed. But regardless of the 3 days, clearly this first part of the Brisa seems to indicate that when it's hefker, it goes out of Yerushos. But the Seifa of the Brisa indicates otherwise. Omar, if he said, Tehei Sadadu, Muvkeres Liyoy Mechod L'Shabbos. So Liyoy Mechod, L'Shabbos Achas, L'Chodesh Echad, L'Shona Achas, L'Shavua Echad. So you made it a heifer for a certain period of time. Ad Shaloi Zachaba, if nobody was Zoiche in it, Ben Hu Ben Acher, whether he himself was Zoiche in it, coined it back from the heifer, or a third party took it away. Yochel Achzaba, he could be Chayzer. He says Zachaba, Ben Hu Ben Acher, and Yochel Achzaba. So this very much sounds like hefker doesn't leave my rishus until someone actually takes it, which would be mashma like Rabbi Yosy. So on the simplest understanding, the Gemara suggests Reish Rabbanon Seifa Rabbi Yosy. The Reish seems to go according to the Rabbanon that hefker takes it out of your rishus right away without anybody helping, and Rabbi Yosy holds that hefker doesn't leave your rishus until somebody actually takes it away. Okay, now let's see a better explanation of the Gemara where this 3-day delay comes from. In the Seifa, you don't see Rabbi Yosy. In the Seifa, you do see Rabbi Yosy, because it seems to only make the hefker irrevocable if someone was zoiche in it. If someone was zoiche in it, so then it's not. So then I can't change. I can't back out. But if nobody was zoiche in it, I could back out. It's only Rabbi Yosy who holds that hefker doesn't remove it from my rishus. Hefker just allows somebody to come and take it.
Why doesn't it work according to Rabbi Yosy?
It only works according to Rabbi Yosy. It wouldn't work according to the Rabbanon. According to the Rabbanon, what's the difference if someone was zoiche in it or not? If it's hefker, it's hefker. It's only Rabbi Yosy who holds. Only according to Rabbi Yosy could you retract if someone didn't take it yet. But according to the Rabbanon, even if someone didn't take it yet, you can't retract. I'm sorry?
Where's Reish Rabbanon?
Reish Rabbanon is the case of a mafker sadeu called shloisha yomim. After 3 days, whether or not someone came and took it, it becomes irrevocable. So we don't understand where the 3-day delay comes from, but that has nothing to do with Rabbi Yosy and the Rabbanon. What has to do with Rabbi Yosy and the Rabbanon is whether you need someone else to take it before it becomes irrevocable. So the Reish seems not to involve anybody else, which means it will become irrevocable, even if no one takes it. While the second half seems to say it all depends on whether or not someone took it. Okay, so let's see the Heilig around. Tanya Mapker Shadeo Kogdimo Yom Yachalach. Reisa Shmuzu Shalon Inspire Yafa B'Divei Rishonim. Zal Lefin is Daiti. I saw that there's a lot of confusion. It's not clearly explained by the other Rishonim. The Chener leBefirush, and that's why I'm going to elaborate. Kol shloshi yomim yochel lachsaboy mikan veilach ein yochel lachsaboy. That's what the first half of the Brisa says. The second half is distinctly different. Midikam maflik b'seifa dim omar teisadazu move keres liyomechad bein zacha leloy zacha. Only in the seifa did the Brisa make a distinction where the heifer only becomes irrevocable if somebody actually took it. The katani shat shaloy zacha yochel lachsaboy umishazacha ein yochel lachsaboy. So the seifa made it very clear that hefker only becomes irrevocable once someone took it away from the hefker. Uberesha leimaflid b'hachi, and in the first case, the Brisa makes no such distinction. Elatoyle chazara l'koydim gimel ula'achar gimel. It's just a matter of when the heifer is chal, but whenever it's chal fully. Shemamina hachi katani. It teaches us that this is what it must mean. Kol gimel yomim yochel lachsaboy mehefkeren. For 3 days, you're allowed to change your mind and reverse your hefker. So I make something hefker, and Mata, you take it right away. I can up to 3 days later change my mind and take it back from you, right? The Gemara is going to shortly explain why this happens, and this is a derabbanan de halacha. So with the Raisa, if you make it hefker, it's hefker instantly. The Rabbanan put a 3-day cooling off period into it. You know why? We know it's very interesting that there's a lot of loopholes. Referring back to what David said earlier, the Chazal built a lot of loopholes into Yiddishkeit. Like, for instance, how do we get out of Chametz Pesach? We sell. There's a halacha that if you don't want to take off Trumas and Maasros from your property, what you could do is you could bring it in through a back door, because only when you bring it in through the front of your house does it become a chuv in Trumas and Maasros. It doesn't even seem like there's anything wrong with bringing it in through a back door. If you bring it in through a back door, it won't be mechuyev in Trumas and Maasros. There's a mitzvah of Shemitah, yet we create a back door of Prismal. So it's actually brought down that the Rebbeinu Shalom expects a very high level from us, and sometimes we're not up to that level. So, for instance, ribbis. What's wrong with taking ribbis? Money has value to it, right? So if I'm lending somebody money, I'm actually giving him value. So why is it such a bad thing to take ribbis? You find that you're allowed to take ribbis from a guy because there's nothing really wrong with ribbis. But when it comes to one yid and another yid, the Rebbeinu Shalom holds us to a higher standard. What was happening was we weren't holding the buy. People weren't holding on that madrega to do that added level of chesed that the Rebbeinu Shalom wants from us to do for another, and that is to lend the money without ribbis. So Hillel said, hey, so because of that, we shouldn't do chesed at all, because people refrain from lending. So Hillel said, let's make a heter iska, so at least the normal chesed, which we are holding to buy, will be done. Because if we try holding it to higher standards, we won't even get a lower level of standard. And the same thing happened with Shemitah. If people are holding by lending other people money, but if now they're going to lose it because it's Shemitah, that's a very high level of chesed that Rebbeinu Shalom is asking of us. And if people aren't doing it, so then let's make a takana so at least people can do normal chesed, and when we reach that madrega, we'll worry about it. And that's where these things come from. So the Chazal made takanas so that we shouldn't lose our normal standard of chesed that we would do because of what's asked of us was too difficult for us to withstand. So what they used to do is, David is about to say something.
Yeah, what I don't understand is that until Hill, things seem to work quite well. Suddenly, people changed for the worse. The nature of a human being is pretty consistent. It's hard to accept that everything, the 1,500 years of Yiddishkeit until Hillel, everything worked fine. But suddenly, people stopped lending because they couldn't get interest.
And
It's hard to
what you
accept.
suggest maybe never worked.
And so Hillel just woke up, in the year.
Oh, now Hill became woke.
There's, I would question that, David. I think that there's an idea that once a society reaches a certain size, I think it's 1,000 people in a town is kind of, there's like the first step sociologists point to, that people stop having familial feelings towards the other people in the town. So it could be that by the time Hill came around,
Is that why people in Toronto greet each other, and in New York, if you greet somebody, they think you're crazy?
on the next block, people in New York don't even know the people who live on the next block, right?
And my daughter once said hello to somebody in Brooklyn, and they totally ignored her. So she's, oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were Jewish.
Like the size, the community, by the time Hill comes around, there was such an established thing, people didn't feel the same sense of closeness. I think the point that Yossi's getting to is that family, you don't lend on interest. And the sense that there was a family connection between Yidden was starting to dissolve. Hillel needed to rectify that problem. Doesn't mean you can't lend without interest. He just found a mechanism to allow strangers to lend to each other.
But not every killer was like that good.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, you know what? What about selling your hummus? I don't know when that started. Okay, you're giving me a sociological reason.
I am 100%.
Okay, so
you asked why things changed. I'm giving you a sociological explanation. You asked why things changed.
Okay, I don't necessarily believe it, but I can accept the argument.
Okay.
But other issues like selling chametz, okay, you're not supposed to have chametz in your house, but it's like a legal fiction that's being created in order to be able to do that. So you're living by the letter of the law, but you're ignoring the spirit of the law, which is as important as the letter of the law.
I think it's so. I wonder how much of that is driven by, the economics of the time. I mean, it was interesting during COVID that the Rav was matter people to sell chametz gomor who normally don't sell chametz gomor, right? Because of the concern about what might happen. So it seems like the Rabbanan seem to have a lot of latitude.
Right.
So let's see this one over here. So Mefarish timer lakamon, the mafgrin v'habdin. People wanted to avoid taking off trumas and maasros from their yield. So what they would do is they would say it's hefker, but it would be a fake hefker. They never really meant that anybody can come and take it, but they declare it as hefker, as a loophole. Never mind not keeping the spirit of the law, not even keeping the letter of the law, because it's not a valid hefker. It's a fraud, just so that he could avoid paying or taking up the trumas and maasros. The mishum the hefker potter min meiser, since hefker is part of a meiser, hayu haramoyin mafkirin tzadosayim. Ramoyin would be mafkir their fields, kidei lifater, only so that they can avoid taking off meiser. While you died on b'shas of keiron sheyachzru behen v'yisku behen. Their intention was, I'll be mafkir it for a second, and before anybody might take it from me, I'll grab it back. I'm sorry. A ramai is a tricker. Lavan was considered a ramai. It's a plural of ramai. The nimsa shaloi hayu hefkerin ela laharama bodat. So it's not really a true hefker. It was just to avoid paying taxes. And because of that, Chazal had to make a delayed hefker. Hutzruchu loymar shem yisku bahem loy yiyu kezoichin min hefker. They had to make it that if they took it back, so they were mafker the person, they took it back, we don't consider it like they were zoicha from hefker. Rather, we consider it like they just took it from themselves, meaning they're mechuyev in maasros. Now, in order for that takana to hold, they had to they had to say that even if somebody else will be zoicha in the hefker, they won't be koine either. And the person who was mafker it will be able to be chayzer and take it back as long as it was within 3 days of when he was mafker it. The if somebody else is zoicha in it, there's no problem of ramai because he actually took it. In order for them to make a gzeira that people would actually listen to and believe and validate, they had to go across the board and say that hefker is revocable until 3 days. Because if they would say that if somebody else took it, they could keep it, Shem Yiru Haramoyin, Shechashiyishkaboy Achar, Kana, if they see that Chazal said only you can't take it back, but if Yena takes it, he is Kana, so then they'll say there that the Chazal's Takana was a fraud, right? Because they'll say, obviously it is hefker, you're just telling us that we have to give Maishras. Lo Yishmu Divrei Chachamim, Shem Lo Yiknu. We're not going to accept it. The lamer they'll say, just like if anybody else takes it, you consider him taking it from Hefker, I can't stop him, I can't back out. And so if I then go and take it, I'm also from Hefker. So they wouldn't accept that takana. But when they said that there's no Hefker at all, even for another person, that was already acceptable to the Ramoyin, that this was a loophole that was closed. Kol Gimel Yomim Eino Misbar Sheyeh Hefker. Since the Ramoyim were fearing this trick, so therefore all 3 days it's not yet clear that it's Hefker. The Ikal Mechesh, because we can be Choshesh, the Loimi Datayim Afkari, they're not being Mafkarit really because they want to get rid of it. Ela Laharama Bilvad will have a Hefker, and it's not Hefker at all. Therefore, it's appropriate to say that even if a third party was zoich in this after he was mafkarit, yachol mafkir lachserboy, the one who was mafkarit can be chayzer shadai lenigmar hefkerei. So by telling people that it's a 3-day process, people aren't going to be mafkir their items for 3 days. They're going to do it just to go in and out. But if it takes a 3-day process, they won't do that. Mikan veilach ein yachal lachserboy, va'afilu lo yizachah by adam, even though no one else took it. You just left it as hefker, loy kol emenu lachserboy, he cannot be chayzer. Mishum de la'achar shloisha, su leka lemechash l'ramoyim. After 3 days, we're not choshesh for Ramai. Shekol shenas hefker b'ramoyis. If I only did it just to avoid paying trumas and maishras, eina ba'ilem ha'achrin liskos by Yosy megimel. There's no way I'm going to wait 3 days. So that sort of knocked off this whole incentive to do that. Zok to Gemara, the Amar to hey sad the zoom of Keres le'mechod. So then it all depends on whether or not someone was zeich in it. Zok Gemara, raise your abundant v'seif Rabbi Yosy. Kasol kedai techasha. At this point in the Gemara feels the time of Rabbi Yosy the Oster b'masnisin kid Rabbi Yochanan. So we're going back now to the pshat that we already slugged up, and we're saying that the reasoning for Rabbi Yosy is because hefker doesn't kick in until the person zoich in it. The Amilil, the hefker kematana, hefker is like a matana. The adasi, the shus zoicha, until the other person takes it. Like nofik meshus mafkir, it will not leave the reshus of the mafkir. Umishum hakika amar, and therefore the Gemara suggests over here that reish rabbanon b'seif Rabbi Yosy. Ubahacha asalei who the brayso shaper. By understanding it this way, it'll explain the brayso very, very nicely. The Reisha Katani calls Shloisha Yavim Yachal Achsa Aripnim Aramain Lucha Deprecious. The Reisha says for 3 days you can be Chajal because of Ramain. Mikan Beilach, but moving forward after 3 days, Ein Yachal Achsa by Medina. You cannot be Chajal. It's fear to the Rabbanon because it's following the approach of the Rabbanon. The Hefker, may Idin the Afkare, Mafkir, from the time the Mafkir is Mafkir it, Novak Lemer Shusay. So that happens 3 days. Later, after 3 days, it's out of his rishus. The Sefer Katani, but the Sefer says, the So the Sefer says, when I say something is hefker for 1 day, first of all, right off the bat, we don't have the 3-day delay. Why don't we have the 3-day delay? Because if I say something should be hefker for a specific amount of time for 1 day, clearly my intention here isn't to defraud the miser. Why? The idaita be'idnu the avkare l'head of a liskabei la'alter. If my intention was just to be mafkrit and take it right back to avoid maisrus, lo malei la'afkir l'zman yedua la'afkir l'gamri. Why would he have said it only hefker for a certain amount of time? For his purposes, if he's just trying to be mafkrit and take it back, he should have made a regular hefker. So by definition, when someone makes something hefker for a specified amount of time, there's no chashash ramai for such a hefker. That's why in the Sefer there's no 3-day delay. The chiyuv de daite lemeheder ulemiskibe lenafkel emidi. Someone who's just playing to scam, just to be mafker to avoid maestros, he doesn't care how long he's not going to put a limit on it because he's being conned right back anyway. Alavadai la'oitzes man shefkirai gamar vehifker beloy haram aklal. Whenever somebody specifies a period of time that he wants the hefker to last for, that's a true hefker. And in fact, someone who's oich from that hefker would be part of a meiser. Ulefichach mishazacha beinu beinacher. Even if he takes it back, ein yochalachsaboy, he can't be chayzer, and therefore he'd be part of a meiser. So I don't know why we're not chayshus that the Ramoyim will get a step ahead and they'll start being mafkir for one day. But Azoyba, we're not worried. This will be consistent with the Rabbanim. Miu, ma'adikatani achaloy zochaba beinu beinacher yochalachsaboy. But that the Brisa says, if nobody was oichin it yet, then he could be chayzer. That only is consistent with Rabbi Yosy, because it's only Rabbi Yosy who holds the svirle that the asi l'shus zoicha le'novik meshus hamafker. It's only Rabbi Yosy who holds that until the zoicha takes it, we consider it still in the domain of the mafker. The Rabbanon, because according to the Rabbanon, kiven the army le'novik meshusay heichach. Why would it make any difference at all if somebody else was coined or not? Regardless, hefker is already out of marishus. Ve'inachanami took to run. The chikatani Rabbi Yosy at shaloi zochaba bein hu bein nacher yochalachsaboy lav davka behefker shehulazman kigavna de seifa. This is a rule that Rabbi Yosy says by every type of hefker. It happens to be that Rabbi Yosy is expressing his opinion here in a hefker that's a time limited hefker. But really, the afilu behefker oilamus, the hainu reisha, really, even if someone made it hefker forever, the yochalachsaboy achaloy zochaboy. Rabbi Yosy would hold that you can take it back until somebody else was zoich in it, because by definition, hefker does not take it out of his rishus. Umiu, mishum de bedina, the misha zochaba, eino yochalachsaboy, loy shavu hefker shulazman im hefker oilamus, lagabi de halacha, of when it becomes irrevocable. There's a difference between hefker lazman and hefker oilamus, whether or not it will impact maestris. That had to say that because that's the only time it would party for meiser. So then, even in the other case, it's stuck to that, where it's a temporary hektish. But in fact, Rabbi Yosy doesn't make a distinction between the temporary hektish and the permanent hektish. Either way, it does not leave the rishus of the mafkir until the other party takes it. Okay, so let me skip over here, because this is going to get us off on a little of a tangent. So now we have our kasha. Our kasha is Reisha Rabbi, this Reisha Rabbanon, the Seifa Rabbi Yosy. So the Gemara says over here that it's not geschmack to say that a brisa is going halfway like with the Rabbanon and halfway like Rabbi Yosy, and therefore Ula comes to the rescue. We have two terutzim to resolve this problem. Ula wants to say Seifa Nami Rabbanon. Let's say the Reisha and the Seifa belong to the Rabbanon. But the problem is, if the Seifa is the Rabbanon, why is the Hefker revocable until someone takes it? It should be irrevocable right away. Because according to the Rabbanon, Hefker right away takes it out of Yerushos. How could you explain that according to the Rabbanon? Shiny Shana Ushavua Loy Shchicha. Shana and Shavua is Loy Shchicha. What does that mean? What does that mean? Zokt Ran. The Ran says very, very nicely. He explains it beautifully. I'll start from Mihu. Mihu milta the Tmihu Hechi Noket Latana Aliba de Kretanoi. That was the kasha. It's not the shmak to learn that the reisha of the brayso is going according to the Rabbanon, and the sefer is going according to Rabbi Yosy. That's why Ula explained the sefer nami Rabbanon. The sefer is the Rabbanon. We have a problem. Why is it revocable until someone's zoich in it? Hefker happens right away and immediately takes it out of the rishus of the mafker. The timer, the achal zochaba, bein hu, bein acher, the yochel achsaboy, is mishum the shiny shavua v'shabbos the loy shchichot. That's not a typical way of making something hefker. Kloimar, what it really means is normally a person doesn't make a temporary hefker. It'll be a permanent hefker. The kivan shishina zeh, since this person did a weird type of hefker, he said it's hefker for a week. Amdinon ledaite, we assess his mind. The kivan shalayratzel afkir hefker oilam, since he didn't want to be mafker permanently. The akati agud gabe, he's still holding on to it because he's limiting the hefker, right? Akadi agud gabe afilu ba'oitzes man shefkiroi. Somebody who's mafkir la'olam, that's out of his reshus. He wants nothing to do with it. But here, even his hefker is a shvach hefker. It's only hefker for a week. It's only hefker for a month. So you see, this guy didn't disassociate, didn't disconnect himself from it in his mind. Such a hefker, even the Rabbanan agree to Rabbi Yosy. Rabbi Yosy holds every hefker remains in the reshus habaylim until someone takes it. But this weird type of hefker, this limited type of hefker, everybody agrees, even the Rabbanan agree, is not going to leave the reshus and the mafker until someone takes it. Hilchach severe lulu Rabbanan, the hefker shehulus man, in a temporary hefker, the Rabbanan gives that the same status. My severe lulu Rabbi Yosy, the hefker ilamis. Rabbi Yosy says all hefker remains in the reshus of the bailam until someone else takes it. The Rabbanan say no, all hefker immediately leaves the reshus of the bailam. But this limited hefker, clearly the Bailam is showing I don't want to relinquish my claim on it. That limited hefker, even the Rabbanan agree, remains in the Rishus HaBailam until somebody takes it. I'm sorry? Anyone in the list. I just use that as an example. Anything that's not a hefker alums. I guess I don't want to listen, but it means any time it's not just a permanent hefker, it's showing me that I want to hold on to it. And therefore, now the Sefer will fit in perfectly according to the Rabbanon, just like we earlier said that it fits in according to Rabbi Yosy. In fact, nobody argues that a temporary hefker doesn't remove it from Irishus. No, the Ran says no, because the fact that I put a time limit on it, it tells us that there's no problem of harama anymore. The 3-day thing was that the Rabbanan took a time delay because of harama. Okay, that is the first shot. There's actually a big shaila how that works. That's one shot. That if you come in that time, you get it. If not, you don't. There's other Rishonim learn that even if you take it, you only have it for that time. So there's actually a shaila how that works. Okay. I don't see any chloride from the Ran either way. Okay, so Zok Gemara Vayta, that was a shita of Ula. Rish Lakish wants to say differently. The Sefer Rabbi Yosy, Reish Nami Rabbi Yosy. He wants to say everything's going according to Rabbi Yosy. So the problem is, if the Reish is going according to Rabbi Yosy, why does it become irrevocable after 3 days? It should never be irrevocable until someone comes and takes it. The Reish Hainu Taima. You know why they made it irrevocable after 3 days? That's also a takana. The takana is the lo lishtakach teres hefker. We don't want people to forget that hefker is going to pater you for meiser. If you really made it hefker, if it was a real hefker, in fact, it would be pater for meisers. But if we eliminate hefker completely and we say like Rabbi Yosy, that hefker is never hefker, then people aren't going to know that hefker is pater for meiser. Meaning, if hefker is never hefker, Rabbi Yosy would agree that if somebody else takes it, he was considered to have been zoiche from hefker, and there that meiser would have been potter, right? If somebody else takes it, he's potter. But if our psyche is that hefker is not really ever hefker, like Rabbi Yosy, people will not make a distinction that when they take our zoiche from hefker, they'll think that it's mechuyev in meisers, and if they think something is mechuyev in meisers and it's really not mechuyev in meisers, that could come out a terrible kilkel. Because what they might do is they might use this tevel to patter up something that's really tevel. And that's where there'll be a problem. And let's see the Ran who elaborates on this. Rish Lakish Amar, we just say for Rabbi Yosy, Reish Amar Rabbi Yosy. I would the Kakashaloch, you're going to ask you, Hachi La'achar Shloisha, Amai Ein Yochel Achzabai. According to Rabbi Yosy, why can't I be Chosh after 3 days? That's also what the Kohen Rabbanan. Hainu time with Lo L'Shtakach Teres Hefker. So we shouldn't forget the Teres Hefker. So let's think about this. Now, there is no more takana to delay the hefker. Up until now, where we were learning the Reish of the Brisa was following the Rabbanon, really should be hefker immediately. The takana is that the Rabbanon made a 3-day cool-off period. According to Rabbi Yosy, I don't need a chacham to make such a takana because it's never hefker. Hefker isn't hefker. Hefker just says you can take it, but it's still in my rishus. So the takana is the opposite. The takana is that after 3 days, we force it to be hefker. So it's exactly the opposite. According to the Rabbanon, the takana is we don't let it be hefker for 3 days. And that's because of the Ramoyan. According to Rabbi Yosy, we force it to be hefker after 3 days. Koloimar, ein achanami. The Medina le Rabbi Yosy, afilu la'achar shlosha yochel achsabo. We know Ikra did, Rabbi Yosy holds that even after 3 days you can be chayzer. Elahainu taima. The reason why we're saying here that after 3 days you can't be chayzer, hainu taima the iamrina on hachi. If we say that you can always be chayzer, people can come to a terrible mistake. Also, lemeimar the chiloi chayzer boy. If someone was not chayzer nami the zacha boyachar and somebody else took it, and when somebody else takes it, it's for sure being zoicha from hefker, and it's for sure going to be part of a maishris. But people are going to think loy mafker gezachi. They're going to say that's not called hefker. That's called taking it directly from the giver. The chivin the mekama the liskibe. Since, according to Rabbi Yosy, the way we're understanding him is up until the point that somebody takes it, I could change my mind. People are going to misinterpret that, misunderstand that it's not even hefker. Alma b'rshusei havakoi. People are going to think, oh, so it must have been his reshus. And now when I'm taking it as a third party, they're going to totally ignore the concept of hefker, and they're going to perceive every hefker as matana. So even if you're mafker something and I'm koinit, I won't consider itself like I was koinit from hefker. I'll falsely perceive it as if you gave it to me as a gift, and therefore I'm a chuyev to be mafker trumas and meiser from it, because sorry the mechayiv meiser. So what's the big deal? So you're going to take off meiser. The problem is v'osul la'asurei mimokam achar alov. What I might do is I might not separate minei from this pile of meisers. I might either separate other meiser for this or this for other meiser. The halacha is if you have tevel, there you could be mafresh trumas and meisers. But if you have grain that's not muchiv and trumas and meisers, for instance, you've already taken off trumas and meisers, or it's hefker, you cannot use that to be mesak in the creek. And that could be a disaster because you could use this to patter up something else or vice versa, and it's not going to work. So therefore they made a takana they made it irrevocable after 3 days, so people will perceive it differently. People will perceive it as a hefker. So let's see the Gemara inside. Zok the Gemara inside. Really, it's not hefker, it never leaves the rishus. The only reason why they made it irrevocable after 3 days is so that people should realize that this is really hefker. Zok the Gemara, if they're trying to show that it's hefker, so why do they wait 3 days? Right away they should say it's irrevocable. Right away they should overrule Rabbi Yosy and say that it becomes hefker right away. Because what about those 3 days? Are people not going to get mixed up because of those 3 days? Omarabba, the 3 days we still have the other problem. The mafkirin, the Ramoyin are going to be mafkir just to get out of it, just to get out of giving trumas and meisers. So we need to stretch it for 3 days. Avol daraisa lo have a hefker. So what you're telling me is that midaraisa it's not really hefker, right? Midaraisa it's not going to be hefker. It's only because they're Ramoyin. So the problem is, okay, before we do the next step, let's see the right hand side. If you're making a takana that you want to show that it's hefker, well then the takana should have been from day one. Why is there a distinction of this 3 days? The like we said earlier, like we said earlier, that they're only mafkir not because they really want to mafkir it, they just want to avoid paying maishras. The nimtza she'ein hefker and hefker. The hefker of these ramoyin is not really a hefker. It's not a sincere hefker. Ela ha'arama b'vad. Therefore, kol gimel hamidu devrei mal din Torah. The first 3 days they went with the din Torah, and according to Yosy, that means that the hefker never leaves your rishus. And after 3 days, then they were mafker it, and it's completely hefker. The einachanami, the high time of Ramoyin, this same svara that we discussed earlier, the Gemara here gets into Ramoyin. If you notice, this is where the Gemara introduces the svara of Ramoyin. Earlier, there was no mention of Ramoyin. The Ran brought it up. So the Ran is asking, why didn't the Gemara feel the need to bring up the svara of Ramoyin earlier? The Ran can tell us about the 3-day delay. How come no one told us about it until now? It was relevant earlier. Zokt around, we're now focusing deeper. Then we were just brushing through it. Now we're focusing in depth on the Resha. So now that we're focusing in depth on the Resha, the Gemara brings up this detail. Remember at the beginning where we wanted to say the whole brush is going according to Rabbanan, we never focused on the Resha. And now we're trying to stretch the ratio to make it consistent with the Yosy. So now that we're really analyzing it carefully, so more information is coming out, and this Svar of Ramoyin applies equally to the Rabbanon as it does to Rabbi Yosy. Just like we needed this halacha of Ramoyin, according to Rabbi Yosy, so if you think about it, the Ramoyin, the Takana Ramoyin is being used differently and being applied differently. We're both in both short and we're worried about Ramoyin, but the Shaila is what are we doing because of it? In the Rabbanon, what were we doing because of the Ramoyin? We were saying the Hefker doesn't work. And here we're saying because of the Ramoyin that the Hefker does work. Ufarchinan, Abul Dairaisa, Loya the Hefker. So the kash here is now amikan ve'elach ein yochalach sabeifor. After 3 days, the Chachamim made a takana according to Rabbi Yosy that the hefker becomes completely hefker and it's out of your rishus. And they made that takana so people shouldn't forget about the fact that hefker patters you from Meiser. The Ka'amar, so the Gemara is going to say, the Nehida Medina, Rabbi Yosy, Yocher Lach Sabay, will have a hefker. Really, Rabbi Yosy holds that even after 3 days, forever you could be chayzer on hefker until somebody else comes and is koined. Tikkun Rabbanon the lava hefker. The Rabbanon made a takana that after 3 days it's 100% hefker. Why do they make that takana? So people shouldn't forget that hefker patters you for meiser. But let's think about this. Technically, is it hefker according to Rabbi Yosy? No, technically it's never really hefker according to Rabbi Yosy until a third party takes it. So if it's never hefker according to Rabbi Yosy, technically, are you mechuyev in meiser? Yes. Technically, according to Rabbi Yosy, you're always, even if you're mafker something, if you're going to take it back, you're always going to be mechuyev in meiser because hefker never removed it from your rishos, even after 3 days. We're making a gzeira after 3 days. We're going to treat it like hefker, but the fact of the matter is, technically, it's not hefker. Kum techos, would you be mechuyev in meiser on that or not? So according to Rabbi Yosy, post 3 days, where the Takana de Rabbanan kicked in, that it should be irrevocable, that you can't take it back, what happens if then you take it back? Are you mechuyev in meiser or not? If you follow the Dairaisa, you'd be mechuyev in meiser. The Rabbanan are saying it's part of a meiser, it's completely hefker. So in this case, would they actually tell him not to take trumas and meisers? Zokt around bevadai shechayvul b'meiser. There's no way you could say that Rabbanan said don't give meiser, even though midaraisa you have to take meiser. Even the midaraisa I have hefker. Midaraisa, this is not hefker. Midaraisa, according to Rabbi Yosy, hefker doesn't remove it from my rishus, so I have to pay trumas and meisers. Now the Rabbanan could use their powers to even change the deraisa. In the Hidshah Yecholim Lepoitroi, we should hefker bez and hefker. Bezin can technically make it midaraisa part of a meiser. They can actually be mafker. Afilu hachi loibo chachamim lohakel the lifter min amaiser mashuchai min atayr. So what the Rambam is saying, even though technically they have the mechanism with which they could make it completely hefker after the 3 days, but they're not going to do that because they don't want to pater it from Meiser. So now they created a very confusing situation. It's hefker, he can't be chayzer, but he's still chayiv Meiser. The chivin shekain, now that we've created such a confusing situation, there's tremendous danger. You might come to take off Meiser from Chiv Amtur. Why? The Amr Zoy the person who's going to be koine this hefker, Vadai, surely, he even shezakuni chachamim, v'masha zechisi, v'bat chachamim, let me keep this, right after 3 days, even though he's objecting, and he's saying, I'm chayzer, Bezin is saying, you get to keep it, right? That's where they overruled Rabbi Yosy. Rabbi Yosy says, I can back out until whenever, and the chachamim are saying, no, after 3 days, he can't back out anymore. So, me who's taking it, I'm going to perceive that is that it must be real hefker. It must be real hefker. And I'm going to misunderstand it. That the fact that he was chayzer doesn't work at all. Really, he could be chayzer according to Rabbi Yosy forever. But the Chazal said after 3 days we don't accept this chazara. But when the layman, come and take it, and he's protesting, I was chayzer, and Bezin says, no, you get to keep it, I don't perceive that as a Kohen Rabbanan. I perceive that this was real effort, and I had every right to take it. So therefore, I should be potter from Meiser, because I was Zoich from effort. And I'm going to think that I'm only mechuyev in Meiser midrabanan the Nigzeres Haramayim, because of Nigzeres Haramayim, Sheshamu Chazarasai, they saw his Chazara, the Chashvu Shais Chazara. But his chazar is really useless. So basically, the person who comes and takes this, even though the fellow was chayzer, after 3 days, is convinced that it's his 100% midaraisa, not midarabanan. Therefore, he thinks that this meiser that he got, that this grain that he got, he thought that it's potter for Meiser because he thought that he got it from a deraisa de kehefker, and he's going to use that al dover acher shu potter minadin, and he's going to use it to potter else something else that also is potter mikradin. Going chitin shagadlu ba'atot sheinakov, like some other type of grain that's only mechuyev to take off trumas and Meiser midrabanan. The soverhu, and he's mistakenly going to think they'll have a tevai midrabanan. He'll think that both are midrabanan. He thinks what he got is hefker, so it's not really chayiv. That's hefker, so and that's also potter midrabanan. So I'll use one to potter up the other, but velesa. But in fact, he would be wrong. The ma'dizoche bei zoicha midaraisa mechayiv. But really, since I get to keep it midaraisa, it's mechuyev. Why? Because really, the deraisa according to Rabbi Yosy is that it could be chayzer. So when I got this grain, when Chazal let me keep this grain, even though this fellow who was mafkid was chayzer, I was not zoichet from hefker. They just took it from him and they gave it to me. In fact, it's chayiv in ma'asos midaraisa. The kivin the chazarasai the mafker mahanya medina nimsa she'ein zoichet from the hefker. Come to guys, I was never zoichet from the hefker. It was just because Bezin took it away from him and gave it to me. So therefore, if I use these pairs that are mechuyev in ma'asos midaraisa, al oisens otzes shein enakov, and I use it to take off ma'asos for other grain that really is midrabanan, because it grew in a flower pot without holes in it, that would be a huge problem. So because of that, we still have a very big issue. How could the Rabbanan make such a takana? It's going to be very confusing. Right. And for the Gemara, let me just finish. And for the Gemara, the Amri Lei, Kima Asris, Asam Neobei. The takana is not only that you get to keep it, but anything that you get to keep based on the takana of the Rabbanan, overruling Rabbi Yosy and saying that after 3 days you could, if someone is zoich in the hefker, even though if the fellow was chayzer, that produce you cannot use for anything else. You could only be mafresh from this produce on itself. Let's just see the last couple of lines. Meisvei hamafger. We could stop here. It's 6:52. It's very, very small daf tomorrow, so we'll catch up. We'll chazor this over because this was very confusing. I could see that I lost everybody. So we'll chazor it over tomorrow and we'll get it clear. So tomorrow, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna review outside the approach through the sugya. If you learn that everything's going like the Rabbanon, and then I'll review the approach going through the sugya if everything's Rabbi Yosy, and we'll be able to analyze the nuances. It won't be so complicated. I the first time I saw it, I also was totally lost. But as you do it a couple of times, it fits in. It's actually pretty simple. We have two plans on the pair. Why? The next article volume? Yeah, we're planning.
Okay. Zwei Schaden. So, in meinem Kopf